I was on a road trip somewhere in Ohio. The highway stretched on endlessly, and I could feel my eyes growing heavy. My body was begging for rest. As night began to fall, I decided to stop in a small, unfamiliar town called Xenia. I found a place to stay, the Xenia Country Inn. It looked old, worn out, like the whole town. But I didn't need anything fancy, just a night's sleep. The place had a strange, unsettling vibe the moment I saw it. I went into the front office. An old man was sitting there, reading a newspaper. He didn't greet me, just muttered 65 when I asked for a room. His customer service left much to be desired. He handed me a key, an old-fashioned one on a blank key ring. No key cards at this place. The key was hard to turn, but I finally got the door open. The room smelled awful, like a mix of stale cotton and vomit. I thought about asking for a new room, but looking around, I knew they'd all smell the same. It wasn't much, just a bed, a couch, and a TV remote that didn't even work. Just as I was about to drift off, a loud bang on the window made me jump. A man stood outside, begging for help, claiming he was hurt. But something felt off. His voice sounded strange, and I had a gut feeling this was a trap. After a while, he left. I thought I was safe, until I woke up in the middle of the night. The room was freezing, and I saw him, standing at the foot of my bed. He loomed over me, tall and menacing. Before I could scream, he whispered, "Don't move, and I won't hurt you." He wanted my wallet. I pointed to my jeans on the floor, and he dug through the pockets until he found it. Then, just like that, he left. I ran to lock the door, but it was still just as difficult as before. I called the police, but they weren't much help. The front desk clerk showed me the security footage, but the man had been wearing a mask and a hat. I left that place as fast as I could and slept in my car the rest of the night. I got my money back and drove off. Thankful I didn't have much cash in my wallet. I canceled all my cards and learned a lesson I'd never forget. Never stop at a sketchy motel. It all started with a simple act of charity. A man and his father had taken time off work to travel to a small town ravaged by floods. Their truck was filled to the brim with donated clothes, shoes, food, anything that might help the struggling families get back on their feet. The road ahead seemed endless, the landscape bleak, but the feeling of doing something good kept them moving. Little did they know, this seemingly noble journey would take a dark and terrifying turn. The first night of the trip was peaceful enough. After a long day of driving, they found a hotel right by the ocean, its windows offering a perfect view of the crashing waves. As night fell, they sat together, sharing a simple moment, watching a horror movie on a laptop with the sound of the sea in the background. They laughed at their own nervousness during the scary scenes, but as the night wore on, sleep came hard. The tension from the film clung to the edges of their thoughts. The next day, their journey took them deeper into the heart of the country, away from the ocean and into an area so remote, it felt like they had stepped out of time itself. Late in the afternoon, they arrived at a small, hidden motel beside a large, murky lake. The lake had once been full, the elderly manager would later tell them, but it hadn't been full in 20 years. Now, it was just another feature in a place that time had long forgotten. The motel was run down, its paint peeling, the air around it heavy with the smell of decay and dampness. The motel was managed by an elderly couple. The woman, who introduced herself as the manager, greeted them with a sweet smile, her voice cracking as she explained the few rules of the property. But her husband, he didn't say a word. He stood by her side, his face a twisted mask of deep wrinkles, his eyes void of emotion, like he was simply waiting for something. His presence unsettled the man and his father, as if they had just stepped into a forgotten horror movie. The lake sat just beyond the motel, a large expanse of water that hadn't been full in decades. The woman had mentioned it almost in passing, but there was something about the way she said it that lingered. The man and his father stood by the shore, staring out at the stillness, feeling a creeping sense of unease. The water reflected the darkening sky, and for a moment, it felt like the lake was watching them, waiting for something. As night fell, they unloaded their truck, eager to settle in for the night. But as they removed the spare tire from the back, they discovered something strange. A small, worn-out bag stuffed underneath. Inside were children's clothes, old and faded. Neither of them could explain how it got there or who it belonged to. The eerie discovery unsettled them both. Unsure what to do, they decided to take it to the trailer park nearby, thinking it might belong to one of the families there. But the night was growing darker, and something deep inside the man told him to leave it alone. Carrying the bag to the front desk, they approached the old man, hoping to leave it for donation. But as soon as he saw the bag, his demeanor changed. His eyes widened in fear. His hands shook as he backed away from the counter. "No," he muttered, shaking his head violently. "There's no way in hell I'll touch that." Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving them standing there, stunned and unnerved. The air seemed to grow colder around them, and for the first time, the man felt a deep sense of dread. That night, sleep was impossible. The man lay in bed, his mind racing. His father snored softly beside. Sometimes we seek the calm of nature to escape the chaos of our own lives. This was the intention of our protagonist and his girlfriend, whose relationship was as volatile as a summer storm. A weekend getaway to the mountains, time to breathe, to reflect, seemed like the perfect remedy. But in the silence between them, there was no peace, only unresolved anger. Though the mountains promised serenity, their relationship was already crumbling, teetering on the edge of collapse. And on the second night, it shattered. A fight, angry words, accusations, echoed through the hotel walls, cutting the still mountain air like a knife. He couldn't stay. The room where their argument had taken place felt suffocating, thick with unresolved tension. The thought of sharing a bed with her, of lying in the same space where they had just fought, was unbearable. But another room at the hotel would cost over $100, and with his mind clouded by anger, he couldn't justify it. Instead, he drove further down the road, away from the scene of their fight, hoping that a night of distance would give them both time to cool off. After a short drive, he found it, a small, nondescript motel. It wasn't much, but for $50, it was a fraction of the price. He checked in, telling himself that some space, some time apart, might be the solution. By morning, maybe things would be different. As he made his way to his room, he noticed something strange. The door to the room next door was wide open, an eerie sight in such an empty, isolated place. Inside, the blue glow of the television flickered silently, casting long shadows across the empty bed and sofa. Though he couldn't see what was playing, something about the open door made him uneasy. There was no movement, no sound, just the blue light. He brushed off the feeling, telling himself it was nothing, not just an empty room, or maybe someone who had stepped out for a moment. It wasn't his business, and after the night he'd had, he didn't want to deal with anything else. The room was exactly what he expected, modest, worn, but functional. A queen-sized bed with a tacky floral bedspread, a small TV, and a single, faded sofa. He wasn't tired, not after the argument, so he lay there with the TV on, aimlessly scrolling through his phone. The noise from the television filled the room, a welcome distraction from his thoughts. But no matter how much he tried to distract himself, the events of the night played on a loop in his mind. He told himself that by morning, everything would be fine. They'd talk, they'd make up, and the tension would dissipate. It had to. He heard it then, something strange, faint, but unmistakable. At first he thought it was the TV, a low, muffled sound like voices or the distant hum of an argument. But when he turned the TV off, the noise persisted. It wasn't coming from the screen. It was coming from the room next door. At first it sounded like a couple arguing, or maybe a TV left on too loud. But the longer he listened, the less certain he became. The voices, if that's what they were distorted, almost inhuman. The sound made his skin crawl. And then came the banging, sharp, deliberate, like a fist pounding against the wall. He jumped, startled, his heart racing. The noise was so sudden, so violent, it was as if someone had slammed their body against the wall in frustration or anger. His mind raced with possibilities. Someone could be trapped or hurt. But he had seen the room earlier, hadn't he? It had been empty, just the cold blue glow of the TV. The thought made his skin crawl. But what if someone needed help? Against his better judgment, he left his room and approached the one next door. The door was still open, the TV still flickering with that eerie blue glow, but now the silence was deafening. He stood at the threshold, calling out into the room. No answer. The room was empty, just as it had been when he passed by earlier. The bed, untouched, the sofa, vacant. But something was off. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of something unseen. His skin prickled with unease. And then he saw it. A small, sticky note, barely visible in the blue light, stuck to the screen of the TV. His pulse quickened as he stepped closer, pulling the note free. The message was short, written in hurried, jagged handwriting. "Check under the bed." The message sent a wave of dread through him. He dropped the note, his eyes drawn to the bed, the shadows beneath it dark and impenetrable. Whatever was under there, he wasn't sure he wanted to find out. He didn't wait to check. Whatever was under the bed wasn't his concern anymore. He ran, slamming the door behind him and locking himself in his own room. His hands shook as he fumbled for his phone, dialing his girlfriend's number in a panic. He tried to explain what had just happened, his voice shaking when the banging started again. In a desperate bid for answers, he ran to the front desk, explaining everything in breathless panic. The banging, the note, the open room, it all spilled out in a frantic rush. The manager listened calmly, his face expressionless, before delivering the final blow. "There's no one staying in the room next door." His mind raced. How could it be? He had seen the room, heard the noises, but when the manager unlocked the door, the room was empty. No note, no evidence of anyone ever being there. Even after the manager's revelation, sleep was impossible. The events of the night replayed over and over in his mind, a nightmare that wouldn't end. As he lay there in the darkness, heart racing, there was a soft knock at the door. The door creaked open, slow and deliberate, but no one was there, just the darkness, thick and suffocating, as if it were alive.